Hello everyone. Wanted to make this video to help people when it comes to memorizing and determining the radian values of a unit circle. Now, we have all been told in the past to just memorize everything when it comes to the unit circle. Now, I don't know about you, but there's just way too many values to remember, and I find that very cumbersome, and especially when you get to quadrant 3 and 4. Sometimes I'm not sure if I have the correct value, so what I'm about to show you is the fast and easy way, which always works for the unit circle. Now here's my unit circle. It's a 1 by 1 circle. It goes from 0 to 2 pi, and I put in the quadrants here. Let me put in the quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4. Alrighty, so there's two rules, and all you have to memorize is just the first quadrant values, and you can figure out the rest of the circle. So step 1 is memorize 3 values in quadrant 1, and those values are pi over 3, pi over 4, and pi over 6. We'll get to the second and the third rule in just a minute. So how do we know? Let's say you don't even know at least quadrant 1. I mean, you should know quadrant 1 at least. Those are the easiest. But to determine quadrant 1 values, you can just look at the middle value over here, pi over 2, up in the very middle of the circle, and the pattern is, one of the patterns I found is that to the left and to the right of that, we can find our pi over 3's. And again, to the left and to the right of that, increases to pi over 4. And once more, it goes to pi over 6. So it's 2, and then 3, 4, 6. And here we have our quadrant 1 values memorized, our radian values. So these are the 3 values that I said to memorize. Even if you don't have those memorized, at least if you know pi over 2, you can find the unit circle. It's that easy, okay? In any case, great. So we have our quadrant 1 radian values. Now, how do we jump from quadrant 1 to quadrant 3? How do we find these 3 values down here? How do we find, for example, what this value is? So this is where my second rule comes in and says, in order to determine an angle across from your whatever quadrant you're in, you take the coefficient in your numerator and add it to the value in the denominator, and everything else is the same. Meaning, for example, if we want to find this value here, which is diagonally across from pi over 3 up here, we follow the second rule, and we take the coefficient in front of pi, which is 1, we add the denominator, which is 3, and everything else is the same. It's still pi over 3. So 1 plus 3 is 4, which is 4 pi over 3. Therefore, this value is 4 pi over 3. So let's use the same concept, and we find the value down here, which is across diagonally from pi over 4. So 1 plus 4 is 5. So 5 pi over 4. Again, for this value here. 1 plus 6 is 7 pi over 6. And we have our quadrant 3. Now, how do we go from quadrant 3 to 2? Well, we can't use the second rule because that's only when you go diagonally across. But there is a third rule that says to get quadrant 2 values, we take our quadrant 3 values and subtract 2 from the coefficient in your numerator. In other words, this angle up here in second quadrant is vertically aligned with 4 pi over 3 in the third quadrant. So using the third rule, we subtract 2 from the coefficient in your third quadrant here. So 4 pi over 3, we subtract 2 from the 4 and we get 2 pi over 3. Same thing for this angle here, which is vertically across from 5 pi over 4. Subtract 2 from 5 and we get 3. So 3 pi over 4. Same concept for 7 pi over 6 and this angle up here. 7 minus 2 is 5. So 5 pi over 6. Awesome. So we have our second quadrant values. Now to find the fourth quadrant, well, it's easy. We already have our quadrant 2, and using the second rule, we can just diagonally go across. And to get that, we know we take the coefficient and we add the denominator. So 2 plus 3, to get this value up down here, we take 2 plus 3, angle up here, and we add it together and we get 5 pi over 3. To get this value over here, we take 3 pi over 4, we add the 3 and the 4 together, we get 7 pi over 4, and last but not least, 11 pi over 6. Now that's way easier than having to memorize all the inner circle values. So really all you need to do is just memorize these 3 points, radian values in quadrant 1, and then remember the 2 rules, and you can figure out the rest of the inner circle. Thank you.